I wrote Vue.js, and yeah, I previously worked at Meteor and Google, and right now I'm just trying to focus full time on Vue.js, which is been pretty good so far. So yeah, I'm glad to see so many people attending the meetup today, and to answer some questions.
Okay, I think we can start then. So
sure.
Who wants to be the first one? Don't be shy.
Okay, simple one. Why did you start Vue.js?
Okay, so I would say the vision for the project definitely evolved along the way. Like when it first started, it was more like being an experiment. I was doing a lot, at that time I was still at Google. I was working on a lot of internal prototypes for UI interfaces, and some of the projects used Angular, some of the projects used vanilla JavaScript. And I felt there's just this need of something that's less opinionated or lighter weight than Angular, because there was just so many things from Angular that I disagreed with, and it kind of I felt like there could be a lighter weight and a simpler solution to some of the most commonly seen problems in front-end development. And I was also curious on how data binding actually worked. So I basically started out a quick experiment, also playing with the concept of using ES5 object-defined property to do the reactive data binding part. So that was the original idea. I worked on it for a few months. It remained an experiment, but later on, I started using it in some of the projects, and it was working great. So I was like, maybe I can release this as a project. So I released it in February 2014. So that's more than 2 years ago. And it remained somewhat like a small personal project for quite a long time, but it just more and more people started using it. So I thought, hey, maybe there's something to this project. I got something right. So I started putting more time into it. So 1.0 was the big push where I kind of want to push Vue.js to a place where it's going to be a serious project that's going to be maintained for the long term. There's going to be more tools and libraries supporting it. There needs to be a community and ecosystem around it to make it a more, I guess, complete and valid choice for any kind of front-end development. So that's when I made this big push to push for 1.0. That was October last year. And since then, actually, it got picked up by the Laravel community a few months before that, and there was a lot of more interest in it. That's also part of the reason I started focusing on it more. So right now, as you see, it's just been growing quite out of my expectation, but I'm also happy to see it growing so fast. So right now so recently we just announced 2.0, and I believe 2.0 is going to basically make Vue one of the, if you think about it, it's going to be able to compete with any of the major frameworks out there. So that's my goal. I want to make Vue one of the best. So, yeah.
You started Vue elements to make Vue components work with the web component. Do you plan to keep your experiment on this, or is this a side project?
Could you repeat the question?
So you started a project. Yeah, you started a project called Vue Element, which will link web components with Vue components.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And do you plan to continue on working on this kind of project, or is it not on the main roadmap?
I think it's a fairly simple, sort of interface layer, because
basically custom. I tend to think of web components, the whole specification, as more of a like encapsulation mechanism, if you know what I mean. So Google wants to push web components as a like whole solution. Like Polymer is like a whole framework that's built on top of that. But Polymer is not the specification. The lower level specification is custom elements, HTML imports, templates, and shadow DOM. And these things, I don't think just with these these specifications alone are not enough for you to build real apps. They are like lower level tools for you to leverage some good parts about these specifications. And to me, that is interoperability. So let's say you write a component in Vue.js, you can wrap it inside a custom component. Now you have a standard compliant interface. People don't even need to know like what's inside. They just take the element and use it. But I believe like that's the core value of the specification. Like you can wrap a component written in any framework, and they all become custom elements, and then you can distribute them easily. And you can even mix all of them in the same project. So you don't, I see the value there, but I don't think the web components alone could make the whole framework thing. So I believe so frameworks like Vue or like React or Angular still need to exist because these frameworks actually provide, higher level tools like data binding, like how do you pass data between components? How do you, manage state changes? How do you do animations and stuff? I believe, so frameworks are still necessary to do those things. So I think these are two different layers. And for me, it's relatively simple to just, wrap Vue components inside a custom element. So I don't think I'm going to focus too much on that part because I believe it's just, in a lot of cases, if you're not trying to mix Vue into with other frameworks, then you probably don't need that. After all.
Okay.
I have a question myself. So how do you sell Vue to big companies? Because I had this issue not too long ago. I did manage to actually sell it instead of jQuery, but I did have quite a hard time doing it.
Yeah. I think it's still relatively early for Vue to have a solid, story for enterprise usage, mainly because it only started to catch on, since last year. Compared to Angular or React, it's really we are 1 year behind in terms of adoption. Also because they have big names behind them, right? It's easier to sell them. But aside from that, I think Vue still has something, a way to go before we can confidently say this is something we could confidently say we are even better than any other frameworks out there, because I think there are still things to do, especially since now we're I believe 2.0 addresses some of the long-standing problems that I've been having with 1.0. And I think Vue 2.0 is, once it reaches maturity, it's going to be probably one of the most balanced and well-rounded projects out there. It kind of adapts to different development styles easily. It adapts to different usage scenarios, and it has, it's not completely crazy, you have to pick everything yourself like React. It's also not you have to just use everything we provide like Angular. It's it's kind of a sweet spot in between where you can start with simple stuff. You can pick what you need, but when you actually need the whole thing, it's there. It works together. So I think that's the value of Vue in terms of just that. And I think at the end of the day, it's also I would also want to make the point it's probably good to have multiple choices when you're picking frameworks, because as you see, different frameworks kind of focus on different typical scenarios. For a lot of enterprises, they just want big monolithic frameworks that just gives you everything out of the box. So for those scenarios, I think Vue probably becomes less attractive, but I do want to push it to the point where, like, I think the end of the day, the focus is still on being incrementally adaptable. So the core is really, really simple. And when you want to build complex and big stuff, everything is out there for you. You can pick and choose as you want, or you can just like, use Vue CLI, get everything together and all that. So back to your question of how to sell Vue for those enterprise usages, I think probably the most convincing part you have to kind of wait, because a lot of, like, when you are trying to sell those things, it's really hard for you to just pull out the actual technical code and like show you, hey, this is so much better, like it's so much easier to write an app, right? Because a lot of times the people making the actual decision don't understand those things. They just, like, what they can't understand is how well adapted this project already is, or how big the company behind it is, right? So I think it's a hard thing to break. So it takes time, and I believe we'll get there, because I believe Vue is indeed better in a lot of use cases. So so it takes time for more and more developers to adopt it from the base level. And now you have enough testimonials and use cases to convince them, say, hey, this company is using Vue, that company is using Vue, this project is built with Vue, and it looks great. So I think these are the most convincing things, right? And I think we still need more of those, but I believe there will be more, because I believe Vue is great. So.
I have a question.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so suppose I have the choice. Today I have to build a front end and a back end, and I have the choice really. But I cannot use Python. So this I need performance, I need speed, I need power, and it's definitely not possible to use Python. You mentioned many times frameworks, different frameworks for integration with Vue. So what would be your recommendation about the most powerful framework to be used with Vue today?
You mean the backend?
For instance, yes.
I think it still depends on your use case, right?
Once again, power. Speed.
If extreme performance is important, it still depends on like what type of app you're building, right? Like if you have a big enough team, like your whole architecture would look different, because say you pick a single stack, a single language, like you pick Python, or you pick Ruby, or you pick Node.js. These, like, one single app that connects to the database and serve your front end asset, these are like really, for relatively small to medium scale apps. When your app is really big, you would want to break up the architecture, say, serve your front end with Node.js in the front, and have your heavy computation logic handled by a Java server or something, right? If that's your concern. I think even better, like, you would completely decouple your front end and your back end, so that your front end app. I'm sorry about the thought. But I think if you have enough bandwidth, like engineering bandwidth, I think an ideal solution is like you have a Node.js server in the front serving your. You would actually serve your static assets, your built front end app, all from a CDN. And then you have a Node.js server in the front that handles server-side rendering. And then your actual, like, heavy computation data-related operations would be written in, I don't know, those can be written in any language, like for extreme performance. Like, you can write it using C++ if you want. But all you need to do is make sure they expose clean standard API endpoints for your front end to consume. I think that would sort of, not only does it decouple the concerns of your whole stack, it also ensures that your front-end technology choice has minimal impact on your back-end performance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question about Vue.js 2.0 that you just mentioned. And
Yes.
so we've seen with between Angular 1.0 and Angular 2, we've seen like huge differences in terms of developer experience. Like they promote the use of TypeScript, and I've seen like some differences in terms of.
Yeah, it would be great if.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like.
Closer.
I was comparing like the switch between Angular 1.0 to Angular 1.2 and what you plan to do with Vue.js 1 to Vue.js 2. So like with, you mentioned like that it would use a virtual DOM.
Right.
But for example, what I really enjoy today with Vue 1.0 is the use of webpack and .vue files that help you have like small single component files, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, what's your
So
plan?
you're worried about like the 2.0 like API changes?
Yeah, for like developer experience. For developer
Right.
experience.
So I could say the development experience will be 90% the same. It's definitely not going to be like Angular 2. If you look at the examples folder of the next branch on GitHub, you'll see that the API is basically the same. Like we only deprecated a number of things that we don't think that people use very often, or we believe that easily leads to hard to maintain code. So basically, we will be upgrading Vue Loader with Webpack, so you get exactly the same single file component format. You write the, like for example, I'm actually in the process of porting Vue DevTools to use 2.0. And in that process, I basically I didn't find any code to rewrite because I only used the part of features that's the same between 1.0 and 2.0. I didn't use any of the deprecated features. So for me, it's like a free upgrade. I didn't need to do anything and it just worked. So the biggest cost of upgrading is probably if you have an existing 1.0 app that uses some of the features that's being deprecated, you probably will need to do some refactoring. But it's not going to be, say, like Angular 2, where you have to completely rewrite your app. It's more like, oh, I'm using this feature. I need to now change part of the code to use a different pattern. But majority of your app code base could remain the same because the experience is largely the same. What we are really improving is the underneath like rendering layer. We changed your engine from your car, but you can still drive the same car.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep,
Maybe the control will be a little bit different, but it's still a car.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know where I have to.
Yeah.
It's here? Okay. Yeah. Can you explain to us a little bit more the new virtual DOM you made?
Sure. The actual implementation is so the concept of virtual DOM first is that I guess the difference between 1.0 and 2.0 is 1.0 uses a DOM-based templating process. Basically, in 1.0 we have a Vue template. We actually turn it into real DOM. Then we walk the DOM tree to collect those directives. When we see those directives, we sort of we create directive instances and bind them to the actual DOM nodes. Each directive instance keeps track of dependencies. So when those data change, they will directly go update the DOM. So this architecture works, but the most important part is there's the cost of compiling and caching the how these nodes should be managed. So when the most impactful part is when we do big list rendering. The cost of cloning those fragments, then creating all the directive instances and bind them to each node, the cost can be relatively higher. With virtual DOM, we basically take a different approach where we parse the template directly as a string, and we turn the template into a render function. I don't know if any of you have used React, but in React you use JSX to return basically you return an object tree. You're returning a JavaScript object that describes what the DOM should be looking like. So in Vue 2.0, what we're doing is translating your template into that render function for you. So now you have a render function, and when we run the app for the first time, it renders a virtual DOM tree, and we generate the real DOM based on that virtual DOM. And on subsequent updates, when data change, we will render a new virtual DOM tree, compare it. We basically walk the new DOM tree versus old DOM tree to compare the two virtual DOMs and patch those nodes. So we basically do a kind of like a virtual DOM dirty check, right? So that's what React does without any optimization. So if without any optimization, you're basically re-rendering a whole app on every update, comparing the whole tree. It's relatively, so JavaScript is really fast. So in React's case, it's fast enough for a lot of use cases. But when your app gets big, you can still run into performance problems. Like just recreating all these virtual objects and comparing them can also take a lot of time. So in Vue 2.0, what's different is that each component kind of maintains its own virtual DOM tree. So when a component renders, it knows like during my render, I have dependencies on these properties from my data. So a component would only re-render if a dependency it depends on actually have changed. So let's say you have a huge app with like 100 components, and each of those would have different dependencies, right? So one of your dependency changed, and only one component affected by that dependency change would have to re-render. But in React's world, it's kind of different. You have to, a component only renders either you have to explicitly set state inside that component, or you have to, but like people use React don't do that, right? They all use Flux. So you would have to basically render from the top down. So you render the whole app. And the only way to optimize that is using shift component updates or immutable data structures, which are basically, I would say it's like hand optimization. If you don't do that, you basically get like suboptimal performance. But in Vue, there's no such concern because each component knows when to update by default. You don't have to worry about an update accidentally updating your whole tree because no matter what data you change, only those components affected by that change would render. And I think that kind of takes out a whole problem because you no longer need to worry about making sure your app re-rendering more than necessary. Like it's just guaranteed to be the most efficient to re-render. That's the biggest difference. And also the core algorithm is much lighter weight than React. So in general, we basically so React's internals is very complicated. There's a lot of specific concerns that Facebook probably has special use cases for, but in our case, we get to like basically throw away a lot of things that we don't need. So the implementation is much lighter weight, and even if we don't have any optimizations, just by running the same rendering and comparing, it's still faster than React's implementation. So these two combined, it basically ensures the Vue 2.0 app will be faster than React in most cases by default, and also you don't have to manually optimize it. The only case where it's different is when your data structure is really, really huge, because when your data structure is really, really huge, there will be a cost of observing those data structures, right? You have to convert those data to be reactive. There's a cost for that as well, but it's a one-time cost, and also it's relatively cheap compared to actually rendering and diffing the virtual DOM. But in extreme cases, there are also ways to optimize that. You basically you can just freeze your data. So Vue never converts them. You just go you just tell Vue when to re-render when your data changes. So you can do that too. But this is also only necessary when you have, say, a million data objects in memory, which is probably a bad design anyway. So it hardly happens. So in most cases, you would want to. So in most cases, you don't even need to worry about optimizing a Vue 2.0 app. That's the case.
Okay, I will not talk to you about the whole Vue concept that you're managing to do, like Angular. But the thing I see is that I've been trying many binding engine, and many of them have the same problem with the dirty check that you talk about it. And even if you don't, you manage to optimize with React and everything like this, you have depending on the machine, 6, 7, 8%, 10% of the CPUs of the page when they are on the screen. So this is really bad at the end for mobile or thing like this. And also, when special case like tree view and things like this that you will need to display a lot of events, lot of elements, lot of events, and things like this. I've been trying all the data binding solutions that exist, like Angular, React, and many of them, and only an old one have been working correctly. I'm not done with Vue. It's named Knockout, and the reason I'm talking about it is that this is the most important thing on the app. If you had a performance consideration, like list and things like this. So the question is, what is the implementation today for the update of your elements? Is it observable? Is it dirty check? And what you are going to do in the future?
I'm not sure if I fully understood your question. Are you saying the rendering a lot of items on mobile?
No, on any device, it seems to be a problem. It's I've been seeing many applications that are out for learning keyboard or many things like this that use React or other binding system, and they all manage to have too much CPU usage. They cannot, at a certain point, they will not respond correctly. And we are talking huge, on computer that's pretty quick. So I think that it's really functional for Facebook that will manage to just show 8, 10 items or things like this. But as you go from real cases that you will show and you will do React over statistics or algorithm and things like this, is going to be very slow at the end. So this is not possible in some case. So what's your point with Vue? And what are the algorithms that you have in place? Is it just dirty check? Is it an observable collection, observable elements? Or I don't know. That's my question for now and for the future.
So first, Vue 2.0 uses a combination of virtual DOM and dependency tracking. So the optimization is focused around typical web application usage. I think what you described, the performance problems you're seeing is probably only visible when you are doing some really, specific use cases, like you mentioned, statistics. So you probably have thousands of items that's being displayed on the screen.
Not that much.
No?
Not that much.
Not that much?
Not that much. I can send you several links, you can check, use case. I'm not developing this site. I've been developing other site, but public site that you can see, and you see that is not. They are using in their code the right way of doing. I've been checking to be sure, just by interest, and that the thing it's not functional at the end. It's many of them many of the users of this site or app are reporting some use case that they cannot use the application like correctly. So,
I think this is really hard to answer without, actually seeing what you did with the, what you're doing in the app, right?
That's true.
Right. It's hard to generically explain why you would handle that because I don't know. Like maybe Vue doesn't do well. Like I cannot guarantee because I don't know what exactly you're building. But from your description, I don't really I think you may be running into some edge cases, but it's really hard to tell without actually looking at it.
Okay, so just for finishing, you are saying that you are using a dependency check, but have you looked for other pattern like observable collection, observable item, or I don't know, there is event driven, I don't know the name exactly, but the thing is that some of the example I see on Angular is very bad, like you have 100 item on the mobile and the app is not responding. That's crazy most of the time.
So yeah, in Vue's case, I would say Vue 2.0 is specifically strikes a balance because so in 1.0, first about Vue's dependency tracking system, you basically pay a one-time cost to have a O1 update time. 01 hot update time. So let's say you have 1,000 data bindings on the page. In both Angular and React's case, when anything changes, then the worst case is you have to iterate over all these 1,000 bindings. Like in Angular, you have to do 1,000 times dirty checking. In React, you have to render the whole thing and compare it 1,000 times. So in 1.0's case, you observe the data structure in the beginning, and later on, when you change one thing, you compare it one time. When you change two things, you compare it two times. So it's directly proportional to how much data has changed. So in 2.0, but the thing is, the hot update in Vue 1.0 is probably the best case performance. But the initial rendering is less than optimal due to the DOM-based templating techniques. So for initial rendering, virtual DOMs has a big advantage. It also supports server-side rendering and picking up server-side rendered DOM and all that. So virtual DOM has a big advantage in terms of initial rendering. So Vue 2.0 is basically combining the two best parts, where we get the initial rendering performance of virtual DOM, and we also have so we have a probably slightly worse case hot update for than 1.0, but the thing is, it's a worthy trade-off because in a lot of cases, the hot updates are really cheap. Because in 2.0, you would eventually break your app into maybe many components. So we are basically limiting the dirty checking or the diffing into the boundaries of these components. So anytime your data changes, only the affected components will render. And when you only render maybe 2 or 3 components on each change, it's going to be really cheap. So let's say you have 1,000 components on the page, and only and you change one data item. Only the component that's affected by that change would render.
Okay, I understood.
Right.
Okay,
so
that was my question. What was your action based on the changes? It was like a dirty check, or it was a reaction based on the place you are in the DOM tree or in your binding tree,
So you can think of it as accurate dependency tracking at the component level, and it's going to be dirty virtual DOM diffing inside the component. I believe that's the right balance to have because a single component re-rendering is cheap enough that virtual DOM diffing is just makes everything much easier. But when you have at the whole app level, you definitely want to make sure you're not over re-rendering. If a component doesn't need to update, you shouldn't update it. And that's what Vue 2.0 does. Basically, it ensures only the component that should re-render re-renders, and because we are only maybe re-rendering 2 or 3 components at a time, it's cheap enough that you don't need to worry about performance.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So my question is about splitting an app in multiple parts. So when you have a Vue.js app and you build it, it's a statically served and only JS that use an API to fetch data. And my question is there a way to split the app so at the first load, for example, only the root part and the main part are loaded, then the login part, for example, is loaded, and you have a dashboard, and the dashboard part is loaded. So I have searched quite a lot about that. I found, for example, the webpack require.ensure, but it's a quite low level API that split at the module system. So you have to, if you do that, you have to put the require.ensure everywhere, and it use callback or promises, but it's the same problem. You don't you add a lot of code just for that, so it's not really a good idea. And so my question is there anything planned to work like that, to be able to split an app into multiple parts that load asynchronously? So you will have a first the first load quite quick, and then other loading that wait for a bundle of components and other stuff.
Yeah. So so you're already using Webpack with like require ensure, right? But I'm not really understanding like what's your problem with that. Like, are you using it with Vue's async components?
In fact, I haven't tried this with Vue.js. I have done it with React for now. But the main problem is that we currently have an app that is too big to load. So the first loading files are just big. So we have to split.
I think require ensure is probably the most robust solution at this moment, especially if you're already using Webpack, because it does the automatic splitting for you. I guess your problem is you have to put everything inside callbacks, right?
In fact, because I had to, I find another way. I use require.ensure, but as a tool and only for. I just add a few split points in my application, and then I use a different system. So instead of requiring component, I use a custom system that deal with it will just check if the module, the bundle is loaded to require it. So it's something that could be implemented at the framework level. So you deal with dependencies to manage it. It's maybe not inside the Vue.js or inside any other framework, because it's a specific tool that will not be used every time, but it might be made to work well with Vue.js, for example.
So I don't know if you've used Vue's async components, but let's say you're building a big app with Vue.js with Webpack, so you'll be using Vue components, right? So your whole app is just a tree of components, and you want to split some of those. So let's say you have home page, you have like logging, you have A, B, C pages. You want to split all those pages. So each of those pages, especially if you're using Vue Router, every one of those pages is just a component. That component would contain its own component and dependencies. So what you actually want to do is to asynchronously load and display those components. So Vue comes with the built-in thing called async components. Basically, it allows you to just use the components as normal, but when you define the component, you give it a function that asynchronously resolves the component. So combined with Webpack's require ensure, you can basically, the only thing you need to change is how you are requiring the component. So other than that, everything else you can just write it as normal. So let's say you have already built app with Vue.js and Vue router, you would have like maybe route home would map to home component, route A would map to component A, route B would map to component B. Now, the only thing you need to change is change the component A to be like a function that require ensure, then resolve that function, resolve that component. So it's like maybe rewriting your route configuration file with like a few extra lines, and you basically automatically get all those components split out. And Webpack would just load those routes asynchronously and display it. I think that's, if you haven't really like check out, there's a section in the Vue routers documentation that talks about this. Try it out, and if you feel that still has problem that doesn't fit your needs, you feel free to open the issue. We can, investigate if there's anything better we can do about it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a not technical at all question. Why Vue, the French word, has name for the framework?
Yes. Wait, what's the question?
Where does it got? Where does the idea come from?
The idea?
The name. The name.
Of the name.
The name? The name? Yeah, it's because Vue is the French word. I mean, Vue is the French word for view, and it was originally designed just to be a view layer. So that was the idea, and because I think the word looks really cool. It's kind of stupid to name it like the English word view, right? Like nobody would actually use it.
So you pronounce it Vue, view. How do you?
So like it's weird because I've been calling it Vue myself, so it's too late for me to change. But since you guys speak French, feel free to call it Vue.
Thank you.
Yep. Other communities like React have a strong opinion on data flow. Do you have a strong opinion for data flow in Vue.js?
So the thing is, I think a big difference is that even in the React community, there's people starting to have realized that Flux is not for everything, right? Like Dan Abramov, the author of Redux, he's been like talking about like Redux. Flux is like glasses. You know when you need it. So if your eyesight is perfect, you don't need glasses. So when you're starting to having difficulty to see things, you realize you need glasses. So it's the same for Flux. So Flux is like data flow. All these like state management libraries, they are designed to manage complexity. But if there's no complexity in the first place, like why do you need them, right? So I believe the case is it all depends on how complex your app is, and that's the whole philosophy behind Vue as a framework as well. Like I believe it's wrong to assume that you need. I believe it's wrong to assume that you need all the most advanced, the most complex solutions, like without even thinking about what you're building, right? If you're only building a simple small app, maybe you don't need Flux at all. Maybe like just component state is all you need. But so when you're actually building something huge, you know it. You would have the feeling like, oh, this is getting out of control. I need something to help me, can like manage the state. I need to like I have like maybe 5 components talking to each other about whether this state should be in this state or that state. So that's the moment you realize I need to take these shared global state out and put them into a place where I can manage it centrally. So that's what Flux does, right? Like, so Vue has its own Flux implementation called Vuex. It's kind of inspired by Redux, but it's designed specifically to work with Vue because Vue's reactivity system is powerful, and Vuex helps you leverage that. So similar to how Vue 2.0 optimizes things out of the box, Vuex ensures that every piece of state you're getting into those components are efficient, so that it's actually a pretty good comparison. Say you use Redux with React in a very naive fashion. You would just the only way to get state out of the Redux store is you get the whole state tree on every single change, and then you put it into your root component, and your whole app re-renders. Right? That sounds simple and nice at first sight, but it would lead to performance problems. So you need like those little optimizations, and so React Redux is the thing that kind of helps you with that, but it's still like less than optimal in a lot of cases. That's why a lot of React developers have to use immutable data structures, because if they don't use immutable data structures, they worry about over-rendering. Like immutable data structure ensures that like everything can be easily compared. But in Vuex, there's no such need, because a Vuex store is also reactive. So it follows the same rules, like only things affected by changes will be rendered. So you don't need to worry about that. So you don't need to use immutable data structures if you don't have to. This is getting a bit technical, but basically Vuex is the equivalent to Redux for React. And I would argue, if you don't see yourself needing it, you probably don't need it. If you are building, if you know you're building something big, it's going to have maybe like 20, 30, or even 100 components, you have like a team of like more than 5 people working on the same thing, then you definitely need it. So I think it's important for developers to, also take the responsibility to think about like what you should apply to your app. Say, if you are make the wise decision about like how much complexity you want to bring into your app, to make sure like it because the more tools, the more libraries you use, right, the more accidental complexity you're going to introduce into your stack. And if, let's say, you're building a to-do app and you're using Angular 2 and using all these fancy features like a dependency injection and all that, which doesn't actually help you build a to-do app. They are just extra complexity, right? But you cannot get away with them if you're using Angular, because it's like baked into the framework. So in Vue's case, like you can start with only the bare bone minimal stuff, and when but before you start, you need to take a moment and think about like, is this going to be growing in complexity later? Maybe if it's going to be a big complex app, then maybe I need those parts to help me handle it. But if it's not, it's going to be simple, then just stay simple. So
thank you.
Okay, so for the last question, just a funny one. There are many applications out there growing with Vue, and I hope and I believe there will be more and more. Which one is the one you are the most proud of because of Vue? I mean, the one that makes you the most happy.
The apps out there?
Yeah, that is with Vue. And
built with Vue.
Yeah, Vue.
At this moment, it's probably Vue DevTools. Like partly because I built it myself. Because, it has like 20,000 weekly active users. People use Vue DevTools and they love it. And it's built with Vue. It gives you like time traveling with Vuex, and you can even inspect Vue DevTools with Vue DevTools itself. Like, I think it's also like a non-trivial sort of interface where you manage displaying a lot of data. You have like tab switching and all that. You're managing state. I use Vuex to build a tool that allows you to debug a Vuex application, which I think is great, right? It kind of validates the idea. Like you're writing a language. If the language cannot compile itself, then it's not a great language. So yeah, I think Vue DevTools is probably one of the one I'm most proud of at the moment. But I'm sure there will be better ones.
So we'll be closing here. Thank you very, very much for being there with us. I hope it was cool for you too. If you have anything to say, you're fine.
I'm really happy to see so many people here. Thank everyone for coming, and hopefully you will keep enjoying Vue. Thank you.
Thank you.